Imagine a world where trade and investment don't have to run through the US dollar. That's exactly what China has been working toward by negotiating currency swap agreements around the globe. Instead of converting money into dollars, central banks can trade currencies directly, streamlining transactions while potentially undermining the dollar's decades-long dominance. For China, this strategy serves a bigger purpose, promoting the renminbi, RMB, on the international stage and reducing its reliance on the US dollar. Over the past few years, the People's Bank of China has inked more than 40 of these swap agreements, with 31 still active as of February 2024, amounting to 4.16 trillion yuan, about $586 billion. One recent renewal involved a 15 billion yuan, roughly $2 billion deal with Nigeria, aimed at boosting trade and investment between the two nations, while also sending a clear message that the dollar is no longer the only option. China's growing web of currency swaps also extends to significant energy players like Saudi Arabia. In 2024, the two countries signed a 50 billion yuan, about $7 billion swap agreement, a major step given Saudi Arabia's traditional dependence on the dollar for oil trades. This deal dovetails with Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 effort to diversify its economy and could push the RMB into a pivotal role in global energy markets. Elsewhere, Russia's tightening economic relationship with China has gained pace following Western sanctions on Moscow. A 150 billion yuan swap agreement helped shift over 90% of China-Russia trade into their own currencies by the end of 2023, curtailing the dollar's role and reinforcing RMB use in energy transactions. Argentina, grappling with economic instability, has similarly renewed and expanded its currency swap with China to $18 billion over 3 years, allowing it to draw on RMB reserves rather than depending on the dollar. This aligns with China's Belt and Road Initiative, supporting infrastructure development and trade. In Asia, South Korea and China have set up a 360 billion won, about $49.4 billion, swap that cushions both economies from currency fluctuations tied to the dollar. Meanwhile, the European Central Bank, ECB, and China's central bank have a $48 billion arrangement to boost RMB liquidity in Europe, a clear signal of shared interest in diversifying global trade currencies. Additional deals include a notable 2023 arrangement between China and Brazil to settle trade in their respective currencies, bypassing the dollar altogether. This shift not only cuts currency exchange costs, but also cements China's role in Latin America, especially in agriculture. A separate agreement between China and the United Arab Emirates, valued at 35 billion yuan, about $4.8 billion, further demonstrates how China is extending its financial footprint in the Middle East. While these currency swaps may seem like a niche financial maneuver, they carry significant implications. As more nations opt to trade in RMB, the dollar could lose some of its unrivaled influence in global markets. Washington, in response, has adopted a cautious approach, particularly in light of ongoing trade tensions, additional tariffs, and a president-elect who has warned of severe repercussions for countries moving away from dollar-based systems. Still, China's vision of an alternative international financial framework presses on, underpinned by the same drive behind projects like the Belt and Road Initiative and technological ambitions outlined in the Made in China 2025 plan. Whether or not these efforts fully succeed, the growing acceptance of the RMB hints at a future where the dollar may no longer hold all the cards. Picture a global financial landscape where the renminbi, or RMB, is no longer just China's currency, but also a key player in international markets, one that can stand on its own against the US dollar. That vision is becoming more tangible thanks to a series of currency swap agreements that China has put in place. One such arrangement with the United Arab Emirates encourages oil sales to be settled in RMB rather than dollars, a move that dovetails with the UAE's plans to diversify its economy and reduce its reliance on the US dollar in energy transactions. Another example of this approach can be seen in China's partnership with Nigeria. Their 15 billion yuan, about $2 billion currency swap, renewed in 2021, helps address foreign exchange hurdles by allowing both nations to conduct trade in local currencies. Not only does this bypass the need for dollars, but it also smooths out bilateral business dealings. A similar story unfolds in China's agreement with Pakistan, where a 20 billion yuan, about $2.7 billion, swap boosts Pakistan's foreign reserves and underpins cross-border trade through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, a crucial element of the Belt and Road Initiative. China has also strengthened ties closer to home. An arrangement with Hong Kong's monetary authority offers a 400 billion yuan, which is about $54.9 billion swap facility, reinforcing Hong Kong's reputation as the go-to hub for offshore RMB transactions. It also bolsters financial stability in the region and supports the ongoing internationalization of the renminbi. When examined as a whole, these agreements serve China's broader objective of encouraging worldwide use of the RMB, reducing dependence on the US dollar and cementing economic bonds with strategic partners. By helping countries sidestep dollar-centric systems, these deals supply key trade partners with the liquidity they need, while showcasing the RMB's potential to operate as a credible alternative in a more multipolar world. However, this growing network of swaps also poses big questions for the United States and the global economy. As more nations opt to use the RMB, the US dollar's long-standing dominance as the main reserve currency could weaken. If demand for dollars declines, its value might slip, seigniorage revenue could drop, and the Federal Reserve's ability to guide monetary policy may become more complicated. Sanctions, which rely heavily on the dollar's central role in global transactions, may lose their punch. Reduced foreign demand for US Treasury bonds could even mean higher borrowing costs on the home front. On the other hand, for countries eager to diversify their financial exposure, these swaps offer a degree of stability. By trimming their reliance on the dollar, participating nations shield themselves from the dollar's volatility, expand their trade opportunities, and gain access to alternative funding sources. The shift away from the dollar is part of a broader historical narrative shaped by economic developments and shifting geopolitical pressures. At one time, the British pound sterling reigned supreme, but the balance tipped as the US emerged as an industrial powerhouse in the early 20th century. The formation of the Federal Reserve in 1913 and the launch of the dollar in 1914 set the stage for the greenback to gain prominence. World War I further fueled this transition, with the US supplying the Allied powers in exchange for gold, thus solidifying the dollar's credibility. Even through the economic uncertainties of the interwar period, the United States maintained its gold standard, preserving global confidence in its currency. Then came 1944, when the Bretton Woods Conference established a new monetary framework, linking other currencies to a gold-convertible dollar at $35 an ounce. With that, the dollar became the linchpin of global finance. The post-war economic boom, aided by measures like the Marshall Plan, only heightened the dollar's status. Institutions such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank were set up with the dollar at their core, anchoring it even more firmly on the global stage. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, however, mounting US trade deficits and inflation began to strain this fixed exchange rate system. In 1971, President Richard Nixon announced the end of the dollar's direct convertibility into gold, effectively dismantling the Bretton Woods arrangement. Although currencies began to float, the dollar's dominance persisted, bolstered by the sheer size of the US economy and the depth of its financial markets. Today, as China orchestrates its currency swaps and strives for a more influential role in world finance, it's challenging a status quo that has endured for decades. Whether or not the RMB can truly supplant the dollar remains an open question, but one thing is clear: the global currency landscape is evolving, and the world is paying very close attention. Let's pause for a brief moment. If you're finding this video useful, it would mean a lot if you gave it a thumbs up. Looking to do even more? Leaving a comment goes a long way toward helping others discover our content. For every major financial decision. That's the essence of de-dollarization, a growing movement, especially among countries across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. that aims to reduce dependence on the greenback in everything from international trade to central bank reserves. Although the dollar has long been the unchallenged heavyweight champion of global finance, it has started showing signs of slipping. Back in the 1990s, more than 70% of the world's foreign exchange reserves were held in dollars. By late 2023, that share had dipped to around 59%, reflecting a clear push by many countries to branch out. What's behind this shift? For starters, geopolitical tensions are making countries wary of depending so heavily on a currency so closely tied to one government's foreign policy. For example, nations like Russia and Iran have been on the receiving end of tough economic sanctions that pack a heavier punch precisely because the dollar dominates most cross-border transactions. These countries have turned to other currencies for trade to counteract that vulnerability. Russia even reported that over 90% of its transactions with China are handled in rubles or yuan, edging out the dollar. Financial sovereignty is another motivator. Economies that hitch their wagon to the dollar can find themselves at the mercy of the Federal Reserve's policy decisions and the inevitable swings in the dollar's value. By shifting to local currencies, or even the yuan or euro, countries can exert more control over their economic destiny. It also helps tame exchange rate risks, which can be especially damaging for countries whose currencies fluctuate wildly against the dollar. De-dollarization can smooth out these bumps, saving money on currency conversion and boosting trade efficiency. At the same time, economic diversification is front and centre for many nations aiming to reduce their dependence on a single currency. For instance, Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 is designed to move the kingdom beyond oil and assert a greater sense of economic self-determination. Part of that plan involves exploring new currency options for oil sales, a notable departure from the long-standing norm of pricing oil in dollars. The United Arab Emirates is following a similar route by inking deals that price some of its oil in yuan, reinforcing the shift toward alternatives. China plays a starring role in this story, through ventures like the Belt and Road Initiative and the cross-border interbank payment system. Beijing is actively promoting the yuan for international use. The People's Bank of China has struck currency swap agreements with more than 40 countries, from Russia to Saudi Arabia to Argentina, thereby encouraging businesses in these regions to invoice and settle in yuan rather than dollars. South Korea's $49.4 billion dollar equivalent swap with China bolsters regional trade, while India is advocating rupee-based transactions with neighbours like Bangladesh and Sri Lanka to trim their own dollar exposure. Similar moves are evident in the Middle East, where countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE are forging ties with China that pave the way for energy sales priced in yuan. Meanwhile, African nations such as Nigeria and South Africa are also looking for ways to mitigate external vulnerabilities. Nigeria, for example, renewed a $2 billion equivalent currency swap with China in 2021, easing its foreign exchange pressures and cutting back on dollar-denominated transactions. South Africa, as part of BRICS, is exploring ways to broaden the use of local currencies for trade and reserves. Latin America has joined in too. In Argentina, the government tapped a $6.5 billion yuan swap line with China to shore up reserves and reduce reliance on the dollar. Brazil has similarly struck a deal with China to settle certain agricultural exports in yuan, trimming currency conversion costs and streamlining trade. Even within Europe, there's momentum to ease away from sole reliance on the dollar. The European Central Bank's $48 billion equivalent swap arrangement with the People's Bank of China increases yuan liquidity in Europe's markets, making it simpler for European businesses to deal in RMB and reducing the region's dependence on dollar flows. For many emerging markets in the so-called Global South, de-dollarization represents a ticket to greater autonomy. Historically, these countries had to play by rules set by Western-focused institutions and systems, leaving them vulnerable to external economic policies they couldn't influence. By adopting local currency strategies, forging bilateral swap lines, or integrating the yuan into their financial toolkits, they gain a measure of self-reliance, shielding themselves from the policy swings and geopolitical pressures associated with the dollar. Besides boosting a sense of independence, de-dollarization paves the way for new strategic partnerships. China's outreach in Africa and Latin America, via infrastructure projects and financial collaboration, has effectively encouraged more use of local currencies in transactions. This underscores how de-dollarization can be just as much about forging alliances and economic opportunities as it is about undercutting the dollar's dominance. All in all, de-dollarization is far from a fringe idea. It's increasingly woven into national policies, reflecting a broader, worldwide reassessment of how countries want to manage their finances and who they want calling the shots. Whether this ultimately reduces the dollar's commanding position is still an open question, but there's little doubt the global currency landscape has begun to shift.